When Evan Kincaid appeared at the door of the Hoh Ranger Station in September this year, he was almost unrecognizable, barefoot, emaciated, with long matted hair hanging down to his shoulders and draped in tattered forest fabric instead of clothing. The man who had gone missing 5 years earlier in one of the most remote wilderness areas of Olympic National Park. The man everyone believed was dead. But the most terrifying thing was not his appearance. The most terrifying thing was what he said about those 5 years, about what happened in the darkness of the forest, and about the beings he insisted are still out there. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the morning of November 18, 2016, Evan Kincaid, 33 years old, a veteran wilderness guide at Olympic National Park, left Hoh Ranger Station to conduct a routine survey along the Hoh River Trail, extending toward the Mount Olympus corridor. His plan included checking trail conditions, recording soil moisture, cross-referencing landslide risk maps, and making a quick observation of unauthorized campsite locations. Evan departed the station at 8:05 a.m., carrying the park's standard radio, a personal locator beacon, and mission paperwork already logged with the on-duty colleagues. According to the plan, he intended to follow the main branch of the Hoh River Trail, continue northeast, then return before 4 p.m. to submit a preliminary report. At approximately 11:40 a.m., the station received a radio transmission from Evan, stating he was moving toward the junction between the Hoh River Trail and a lesser-used side trail leading into a more remote area. The signal was slightly noisy due to bad weather, but still clear enough for colleagues to confirm his approximate location. This was the last recorded contact of the day. By 4:30 p.m., Evan had not returned as expected. On-duty colleagues attempted to re-establish contact via radio and his personal satellite phone, but received no response whatsoever. A small reconnaissance team was dispatched along the main trail to possible points where Evan might appear, but they found no signs at all. Evan's complete loss of signal became highly unusual, especially since he was known for strictly following communication protocols and had never missed a check-in time during his 10 years working at the park. At 6:10 p.m., the station decided to call Evan's family to confirm whether he had attempted direct contact. The family replied that they had received no calls or messages from him throughout the day. As time continued to pass without any further signs, concern grew markedly. By 8:50 p.m., after a second notification confirmed that the park still could not reach Evan and all internal search efforts had yielded no results, the family realized this was no longer a routine delay. They decided to contact the Clallam County Sheriff's Office directly to report the prolonged loss of contact. The Sheriff's Office accepted the case, recorded identifying details, planned route, departure time, and items Evan was carrying, while assessing the severe weather blanketing the Hoh Rain Forest area as a significant risk factor. Given the possibility that Evan had encountered trouble deep in the backcountry, authorities officially opened a missing person case that very night and relayed the information back to park management to initiate coordinated procedures. Immediately after the case was opened, the Park and Clallam County Sheriff's Office agreed to deploy search and rescue SARAD at Level 1, starting at dawn the next day, while urgently reviewing registered route data to define priority search zones. By 5:45 a.m. on November 19th, SARAD teams assembled at Hoh Ranger Station and began establishing the initial search area with a 5-mile radius from Evan's last recorded radio contact point. The tracking team was sent out first, using GPS maps, terrain data, and landmarks along the Hoh River Trail to determine a logical travel path for an experienced guide like Evan. After nearly 2 hours of sweeping, the tracking team located a series of footprints matching the size and tread pattern of Evan's boots, continuing along the main trail until they abruptly veered off into a section of forest not part of the standard route. Leaving the main trail was unusual because, per survey protocol, Evan had no reason to deviate from the permitted area that day. The footprints led into a dense, thickly vegetated forest area before fading due to overnight rain softening the soil surface and destroying identifiable structure. While the tracking team continued trying to reconstruct the path, SAR helicopters conducted aerial reconnaissance along the Hoh River and its tributaries to look for signs of a fall, scattered gear, or any disturbed ground that might indicate an accident. Despite multiple continuous sweeps, the crew observed no terrain damage or areas showing evidence of a person passing through. On the ground, a K9 team was deployed to follow the scent from a single glove and sample clothing provided by the station. However, the all-night rain diluted the scent rapidly, causing the K9 to lose the ability to accurately pinpoint an area. By midday, familiar approach routes had been narrowed, and the search plan expanded into trailless areas where the thick canopy and rugged terrain slowed movement and increased danger levels. SAR divided into triangular grid patterns, checking each terrain cell using compass bearings, GPS, and natural landmarks. Areas near the Hoh River and high-risk landslide zones were approached first to rule out accidents. By the end of the day, despite covering most of the designated zone, the search team found no new evidence or signs indicating Evan had moved in any clear direction after leaving the main trail. Radio contact attempts continued to yield nothing, and worsening weather forced SAR to adjust plans for the following day with heightened urgency. On the second day of searching, while the tracking team continued following the fading footprints in the dense forest near the Hoh River, one SAR member discovered a single glove lodged in damp moss about 400 meters from the point where the trail was abandoned. Quick inspection confirmed it matched the type Evan typically used on surveys, with size and rubberized grip fibers perfectly matching the gear issued by the station. The discovery of the glove raised questions about whether Evan had removed or dropped it while moving, but its location significantly deviated from a logical path, prompting the command team to widen the sweep radius. During a 50-meter radius sweep around the glove's position, the SAR team noticed a roughly 2-square-meter patch of ground that appeared deliberately cleared with a sharp or flat tool. Forest duff pushed aside, the soil surface unnaturally smoothed, and no animal digging marks, indicating human intervention. However, after multiple careful probes with poles and flashlights, the team found no additional dropped items belonging to Evan, nor any drag marks or signs of heavy objects being moved. The footprints around the cleared area were too faint to determine how many people had stood there, but the glove's presence farther from the deviation point than expected, combined with the purposeful ground alteration, led the SAR command to note the possibility of a second person being present in Evan's vicinity at the time of disappearance. This information was entered into the end-of-day report and forwarded to the analysis section at Hoh Ranger Station, where the case file was updated to missing person with suspicious elements, allowing expansion of the assessment beyond ordinary wilderness accidents. Moving into the third day of searching, as SAR teams prepared to expand the sweep around the glove discovery site and the anomalous cleared ground, a powerful cold front from the Pacific swept into the Olympic area, causing a sudden weather shift. Heavy rain quickly turned to wet snow, then to a full-blown high-intensity blizzard that blanketed the entire Hoh rainforest within just a few hours. The fresh snow completely covered any remaining footprints and instantly erased the ground disturbances. The tracking team had been trying to reconstruct, eliminating the ability to determine Evan's next direction of travel after leaving the main trail. Strong winds whipping through the Hoh Valley made natural sound detection nearly impossible, while visibility dropped below 15 meters, preventing grid teams from maintaining detailed search formations. Faced with these conditions, the SAR commander was forced to suspend most deep forest search operations and temporarily withdraw teams to the main trail to avoid risking rescuer safety. Rapidly dropping temperatures caused the ground to freeze in patches, rendering detection of mechanical tracks, drag marks, or any terrain anomalies virtually impossible. By afternoon that day, with snow continuing to fall heavily and forest operating conditions no longer safe, command reduced the search team to a small group of highly experienced personnel, focusing solely on sweeping along the Hoh River bank to rule out Evan falling into the water or being swept away in fast-flowing sections. This group moved slowly along the now slippery riverbank, but after hours of meticulously checking every rock, fallen log and deep undercut, found no body, clothing, equipment, or personal items. In parallel with the ground team, helicopters continued low-level flights along the river channel, looking for floating objects, but strong winds and severely limited visibility made aerial observation almost worthless. By day's end, with the entire area buried under more than 20 centimeters of fresh snow, Ezer officially shifted the search status from rescue to body recovery, per protocol for complete loss of trace in extreme weather conditions. Over the next 3 days, Ezer attempted to maintain a minimal search range along the riverbank and a few safe trails, but ongoing bad weather made expansion deeper into the forest unsafe for personnel. All initially suspicious areas, including the glove location and the cleared patch, could not be resurveyed due to the frozen snow layer completely altering the terrain. After the 7th day, with forecasts showing no upcoming weather window, Ezer Command recommended scaling back operations and retaining only a small team to monitor the riverbank in case a body or items were carried downstream. However, 3 additional days of continuous monitoring revealed no signs whatsoever that Evan had been swept away by water or fallen from the bank. No fresh landslides, no snapped trees, no personal items. The entire forest region Evan was believed to have traversed was now completely covered in snow, rendering all prior signs unanalyzable. Exactly 10 days after Evan was reported missing, the Ezer Command Council, with unanimous agreement from Olympic National Park and Clallam County Sheriff's Office, decided to temporarily suspend search operations due to the absence of new data to expand or alter tactics. The case was kept in awaiting further information status, and all Ezer personnel were withdrawn from the Hoh River area, leaving only a small team to monitor weather and report any changes in natural conditions that might allow resumption of search activities. After official Ezer search operations were temporarily closed, Evan's family refused to let the disappearance remain in indefinite limbo, especially as the Hoh rainforest entered a prolonged winter season that increasingly reduced chances of finding new evidence. They quickly organized an independent search network, beginning with calls for volunteers through hiker forums, local mountaineering groups, and the community of former Olympic National Park employees. In the first 2 weeks, more than 30 people joined the volunteer efforts, dividing into small teams following routes Evan might have taken and focusing on forest sections Ezer could not reach due to the blizzard. The family hired 2 high-resolution camera drones and 1 FLIR device to search for body heat or anomalies beneath the forest canopy. Drones flew parallel transects along the Hoh River and its tributaries to detect foreign objects amid the recently snow-covered woods. However, low temperatures and extremely dense canopy prevented FLIR from penetrating the layers, while drones repeatedly had to lower altitude to avoid collisions with trees, significantly reducing detection range. Contacting hikers who had passed through the trail during the week Evan disappeared became the family's next priority. They posted notices on outdoor forums requesting anyone on Hoh River Trail from November 15th to 20 to provide photos, videos, GPS data, or personal notes. Several people responded and shared data, but most only recorded bad weather conditions with no special observations. The GPS files were manually analyzed by the family's GIS expert, but no unusual stops, gatherings, or route changes potentially related to Evan were detected. When direct forest efforts yielded no results, the family began listening to and collecting rumors in forks and communities near the park. One of the most frequently mentioned rumors in the local community was the existence of a man who had lived as a hermit in the Olympic forest for many years. Some claimed to have seen him on obscure trails. Others said they had found old camp signs in forests rarely visited by people. Although the stories were oral and lacked concrete evidence, the family recorded all details, compiled them into a report, and submitted it to police in hopes it might help identify areas containing illegal cabins or shelters. However, after cross-referencing with terrain records and SR search data, police concluded there was insufficient basis to reopen the case, as the accounts lacked specific locations, clear dates, and direct eyewitnesses seeing Evan. The official response emphasized that all tips were logged in the file, but authorities could not launch a new investigation based on speculative information. Despite the disappointment, the family continued maintaining small search groups on better weather days, but accumulating snow made deeper access practically impossible. By the end of December, independent search efforts were temporarily halted due to unsuitable natural conditions, and Evan's disappearance entered a phase with no further progress from either the family or authorities. Moving into the first anniversary of Evan's disappearance, when the family's independent search activities had to pause due to winter weather and extremely harsh terrain conditions, some scattered data began emerging from people who had passed through the Hoh River area around the time Evan vanished. While not clear enough to create a breakthrough, these were recorded as initial indicators that the South Fork Hoh area, less traveled than the main trail, might have played a role in what happened. Among them, the most notable were reports from 3 separate hiker groups, all claiming that on November 18th or very close to that date, they heard strange sounds echoing from deep in the forest. 2 described sounds resembling scattered cries for help carried by the wind, while the third said it sounded like violent thrashing in the water in a section not part of the main river branch. None of the 3 groups could pinpoint the location due to bad weather and high humidity, causing sound distortion and long-distance propagation. The data they provided was compiled by the family and forwarded to police, but due to the lack of specific location, police only logged it without considering it sufficient evidence. In addition to the unusual sounds, an amateur wildlife photographer also sent a report to the family after reviewing photos taken during a trip the week Evan disappeared. In a series of forest shots from South Fork Hoh Valley, he noticed a blurry motion in the corner of the frame amid thick canopy. Due to low image quality and no clear subject, it could not be determined whether it was a person or animal, but the location fell within an area SAR had never deeply penetrated due to the blizzard. The photographer also noted that the photo was taken late afternoon on November 18th, coinciding with the time Evan was no longer appearing at the station. The family forwarded the photo to police, but once again, due to the lack of identifying elements, the report was merely logged without triggering an investigation. Another data source came from hikers using personal GPS devices. When the family posted requests for GPS files from anyone present in the area that week, several people sent data, and a GIS technician known to the family took on the analysis. In it, he discovered an anomaly. 2 GPS files from 2 different groups, both recorded a short dropout segment when both groups passed through a small area near the South Fork Hoh branch. Specifically, their paths for about 1 to 2 minutes were not recorded as straight lines, but deviated into zigzag patterns or sudden jumps off the expected continuous trajectory. Such signal deviations are often related to satellite interference from dense canopy or terrain blocking. But what caught the family's attention was that the deviation segments matched almost perfectly in location. This suggested the area might contain rock formations or terrain features causing interference, or possibly the presence of a large metallic object. Overlaid GPS maps further showed the dropout point lay squarely within the triangle that SAR had not accessed during the initial search due to the blizzard. Although this was fairly clear technical data, police assessed it as showing no direct connection to Evan and logged it without initiating field verification. Overall, throughout the first year, all witness data including strange sounds, blurry motion in photos, and interrupted GPS segments was viewed by police as secondary leads, insufficient in weight to open a formal investigation due to lack of independent corroboration. The family continued storing all this information as part of their separate search file, but neither they nor authorities could take any further steps because there was no specific data or physical evidence to directly connect these scattered signs to Evan's disappearance. Into the second year since Evan disappeared, when the scattered data from the first year still hadn't produced any specific connecting points, the family continued to maintain a channel for receiving information from the community of hikers and residents around Olympic National Park. It was during May and June of the second year that two noteworthy reports from two different hiking groups drew the family's particular attention, as both incidents shared striking similarities and occurred near the original SR search perimeter. The first group, consisting of two highly experienced trekkers, reported that while traveling along a little-used side branch of the Hoh River Trail, they spotted a gaunt man with long hair and a thick beard standing about 60-70 meters away. At first, they thought he was a drifter or a solo hiker resting, but the man's behavior turned highly unusual the moment he realized others were present. Instead of returning their greeting, he startled, took several steps backward, then vanished into the underbrush with remarkable speed, almost as if trying to leave no trace. The two attempted to approach the area where he disappeared, but found no clear path or temporary shelter. What made the incident memorable to them was not only his panicked demeanor, but also the clothing he wore, an olive-colored backcountry jacket and light gray trekking pants that closely resembled the lightweight uniform issued by Olympic National Park to guides and patrol staff. While they couldn't confirm it was official uniform, the similarity in color tone, material, and cut made them feel compelled to report it to the appropriate authorities. The second group submitted their information just 3 weeks later. They reported encountering a skeletal thin man standing between two fallen trees near the junction of Hoh River Trail and a small path leading toward South Fork Hoh Valley, as if he were trying to observe the surrounding. When the hikers moved closer to ask if he needed assistance, he immediately shrank back, then fled deep into the forest in a direction with no trail, using paths that were far too narrow and rough for an ordinary person. They described that as he turned to run. His clothing also appeared to match a thin dark green jacket and dark long pants, typically used for outdoor work in damp environments. Combining the two reports, the family noticed clear overlaps. Both described a man with the same emaciated appearance, extreme avoidance of contact, and clothing bearing similarities to the gear Evan used during survey missions. Moreover, both incidents took place in areas lying just along the northern and northeastern boundary of the first-year SAR perimeter, precisely the region that the search teams could not fully cover due to that year's heavy snowstorms. This was what particularly concerned the family, as it suggested someone had been present in the unsearched portions of the forest and had survived there for a considerable period. Furthermore, the extreme avoidance behavior was inconsistent with the typical profile of a lost hiker. Most people in distress in the wilderness actively seek out others for help, whereas the man the two groups encountered reacted as though terrified of being discovered. Nevertheless, for law enforcement, these two reports still lack sufficient weight to reopen the case. When the family submitted the witness statements and clothing descriptions, police cross-checked them against records of other missing persons in Washington to rule out misidentification, but no other matching case existed besides Evan. While there was still no direct evidence confirming the man in the reports was him, police noted that Olympic National Park occasionally has hermits or temporary forest dwellers, making positive identification based on physical description alone extremely difficult. With no accompanying physical evidence, no precise location for follow-up survey, and no direct link between the sightings and Evan, authorities decided to keep the reports on file as unverified tips, without reopening an investigation or deploying additional search resources. For the family, these two reports served as new pieces in an incomplete puzzle. For the authorities, they did not yet cross the threshold required to change the case status. Thus, despite additional witnesses in the second year, the disappearance still saw no official progress from law enforcement. Entering the third year, when all data collected over the previous 2 years still lacked concrete physical evidence strong enough to force the police to reopen the file, the family unexpectedly received new information from a wildlife photographer active along the Hoh Rain Forest. The photographer stated that while reviewing his archives in preparation for an exhibition, he discovered an anomalous frame taken 8 months earlier on a foggy morning near the transition area between Upper Hoh Road and the forest leading toward Glacier Meadows. The photo was originally intended to capture a herd of elk moving through the dark forest floor, but in the distant left corner, behind a layer of blurred trees, stood a motionless human figure, body slightly leaning forward, as if observing the area ahead. The photographer, accustomed to seeing hikers or legal hunters, initially paid it no mind, but after hearing about Evan's long-term disappearance from a friend in the local tourism industry, he decided to send the photo to the family for their own assessment. When the human figure portion was maximally enlarged, despite significant grain and noise, the body contours were clear enough to estimate a relative height of about 6 feet, matching Evan's recorded height. The slightly hunched shoulders, unnaturally limp arms, and angled head posture indicated a wary stance, quite similar to the descriptions from the 2 hiking groups in the second year who had encountered a gaunt man avoiding contact. What particularly caught the family's attention was the outer garment's color tone, which closely matched the olive softshell lightweight jacket Evan commonly wore on spring survey trips. Although the image quality was insufficient to confirm material or stitching details, the similarity in hue and silhouette led his loved ones to believe the identification could not be dismissed. However, when a family member used image processing software to increase contrast, they incidentally discovered a second shape at the right edge of the frame, about 20 to 25 meters from the first figure. The second shadow was indistinct, but sufficiently recognizable as a larger body standing upright and apparently facing toward the first figure. The presence of this second figure dramatically increased the photo's significance. If the first person was Evan, as the family believed was probable, then the second person could be someone monitoring or controlling his movements. Combining this with the prior year's reports of a gaunt man fleeing at the sight of strangers, the family began seriously considering the hypothesis of control by a second individual, as it logically explained the absolute avoidance behavior and the sporadic appearances in deep forest areas without leaving survival traces. To verify the photograph, the family enlisted a group of local volunteer residents familiar with the terrain to cross-reference the GPS metadata coordinates with detailed maps of the first-year SARE deployment. The results showed the shooting location lay entirely within the corridor that SARE had once considered a plausible movement route if Evan had been forced to leave the main trail toward the northeast. Furthermore, this spot was approximately 2.3 miles as the crow flies from where the glove was found, consistent with the trajectory a person under coercion might follow, maintaining just enough distance to avoid detection from main trails while still remaining within observable range of forest activity. Notably, the area where the photo was taken was not part of any designated camping zone or legal hiking route, and the simultaneous presence of 2 people in a trailless forest region was extremely rare. This data reinforced the assessment that this was not a chance encounter. Once the location cross-reference was complete, the family submitted the full package, original photo, figure analysis, and overlaid map, to the Clallam County Sheriff's Office. The investigative unit carefully examined the metadata for authenticity and forwarded an enlarged version to an image analysis team for basic identification assessment. Authorities acknowledged that the estimated height matched Evan's and that the presence of a second figure was a noteworthy detail, suggesting companionship rather than a solitary lost person. However, they also pointed out critical limitations: excessive distance, low image quality, face completely unrecognizable, and no accompanying physical evidence to legally connect the person in the photo to Evan. They stressed that while this added to previous reports, the law required a strong corroborating element, such as an object, DNA, or direct eyewitness, before formally reopening an investigation under a new hypothesis. Therefore, police simply added the photo to the file, classifying it as unidentified photographic evidence, and continued keeping the case in closed but passively monitored status. The family felt strongly that although the photo provided a far more significant piece than the previous fragmented information, it still lacked the weight necessary to alter the authorities' approach. Nevertheless, for them, it represented the clearest evidence to date that Evan was still alive at the time the photo was taken, and more importantly, that he was not alone in the forest. In the 4th year, just when the chain of leads seemed exhausted, a major breakthrough occurred when a group of hikers reported to the family that they had found a dark green thin rain jacket snagged under rotten branches near the intersection of Sol Duke River Trail and a narrow northbound slope toward Ridge Creek. Although faded and slightly torn at the shoulder, the jacket retained the shape of the specialized rain gear once issued by Olympic National Park to guide staff during the period Evan worked there. The family immediately inspected it and confirmed the rain jacket matched approximately 90% with the one Evan had carried on his survey trip the year he vanished, including the heat-sealed seams, vent hole count, and zipper structure. However, because the jacket no longer had a name label and prolonged exposure had rendered DNA traces nearly non-existent, the evidence required deeper analysis to determine where it had been used before being abandoned. When the jacket was sent to the Washington State University Geology Lab for soil trace analysis, the results were surprising. The soil sample clinging to the lower hem contained a mineral profile corresponding to the mixed alluvial soil of the South Fork Hoh River area, including characteristic ratios of water-worn basalt grains and distinctive silica markers from moist riparian layers. This immediately drew attention because the jacket was found in the northwest Sol Duke area, more than 12 miles as the crow flies from South Fork Hoh River, far too distant for natural soil adhesion, unless the jacket had spent considerable time there. In parallel with the soil analysis, botanists examined residual pollen trapped in the inner stitching, which tends to persist longer than most biological traces. The results revealed pollen from 3 species, Tsuga heterophylla, Polystichum munitum, and a small amount of Vaccinium ovatum, a combination that precisely matched the low-elevation understory vegetation around 500–700 feet in the South Fork Hoh area, and did not match the Sol Duke area, which has a higher fur ratio and pollen dominated by Picea sitchensis. Together, the soil and pollen evidence indicated the jacket did not originate at the discovery site, but had been transported from the South Fork Hoh area, somehow moving more than 10 miles northwest. This prompted several hypotheses. Evan may have been taken through trailless deep forest routes, or the person controlling him, as suggested in earlier leads, had operated over a wider area than initially assumed. When overlay maps of the soil, pollen results and the third-year photographic data were created, a clear intersection zone emerged, a roughly 3–4 square mile band of forest between the northern edge of South Fork Hoh and the ridgeline extending toward Sol Duke, a densely vegetated area rarely visited by hikers and never thoroughly searched during the first-year SAR due to weather conditions. The terrain featured alternating depressions and steep slopes, with numerous fallen tree blockages, making trail-based movement nearly impossible, yet providing an ideal environment for someone seeking to hide or keep another person concealed from view. Once the narrowed potential area map was submitted to the Clallam County Sheriff's Office and combined with the third-year photographic evidence suggesting a second person, authorities were compelled to re-examine the entire case. Under pressure from the family, the hiking community, and especially the now reinforced second-year witness reports, plus physical evidence, a formal review was opened to determine whether the rain jacket carried sufficient legal weight to reactivate the file. The analysis concluded that, although no DNA remained, the soil, pollen match to the presumed area of Evan's disappearance was strong, and the discovery location was anomalous enough that it could not be dismissed as wind-blown or accidentally dropped debris. This report, together with the alignment to the controlled movement trajectory implied by the third-year photo, created the first reasonable connecting point in 4 years. From this point, police officially changed the case status from temporarily closed to reopened investigation, allowing the initiation of new data collection, establishment of specialized search corridors, and mobilization of higher-level resources for dense forest search operations. For the family, this represented the greatest progress since the day Evan vanished. For the investigative team, the rain jacket became the first piece of legally qualifying evidence to seriously question whether Evan had simply gotten lost, or had instead been taken through deep forest areas on an entirely involuntary journey. Near the end of summer, in the 5th year since Evan's disappearance, as the newly reactivated investigation based on the rain jacket evidence and the narrowed area of interest, was underway. An unforeseen event occurred. A group of visitors traveling on a secondary road near the western edge of Olympic National Park, about 4 miles from Sol Duc Hot Springs, suddenly saw a man step out of the forest in a state of near-total physical exhaustion. He was skeletal thin, with long tangled hair, ashen gray skin, tattered clothing, and a staggering gait, as though unable to maintain balance. At first they assumed he was a lost hiker or a recluse avoiding society. But when the man briefly lifted his head into the last light of day, one member of the group instantly recognized the face as matching images of Evan Kincaid that had been widely circulated on missing person notices years earlier. They shouted to check his response, but the man did not reply, taking only a few more steps before collapsing beside a tree. One of the visitors approached and noticed his breathing was very shallow. There were numerous old ligature-like marks around his neck and wrists, and his flesh showed clear signs of prolonged malnutrition. They immediately called 911 and kept him conscious by slowly administering sips of water, avoiding sudden stimulation because he recoiled in fear the moment anyone touched him. Emergency medical personnel arrived on scene approximately 25 minutes later and promptly transported him by ambulance directly to Olympic Medical Center in Port Angeles. At the hospital, the initial emergency team could not immediately confirm identity because the man was unable to speak, had no identification, and exhibited panic symptoms in the first few hours whenever adult voices were near. Doctors recorded severe emaciation, body weight reduced by nearly 30% below average for an adult male of his height, profound muscle wasting, long-term dehydration, skin darkened and cracked from lack of natural sunlight, yet with unusual long dark bands on the left wrist, consistent with repeated restraint marks. The initial report noted no acute injuries, but numerous microtraumas indicative of prolonged stress. When hospital staff shone lights to check his eyes, he recoiled and raised a hand to shield his face reflexively, as though accustomed to living under severely restricted lighting conditions for an extended period. Port Angeles police received notification of a man suspected to be a long-term missing person just 3 hours after admission and immediately dispatched investigators to coordinate. Because visual identification was unreliable due to extreme health deterioration and physical changes, they performed fingerprint scanning, but the prints were lightly worn from prolonged friction, yielding inconclusive results for comparison. The next step, therefore, was to collect an oral swab for DNA and compare it against the sample on file from when Evan had worked as a guide for the National Park Service. The analysis results came back after nearly 8 hours and showed a perfect match. The man's identity was officially confirmed as Evan Kincaid. When the information reached the Clallam County Sheriff's Office, the missing person case was immediately reclassified as survivor of prolonged captivity, a rare designation but one consistent with the clinical signs: controlled malnutrition, repetitive trauma at fixed locations, conditioned panic responses typical of captive individuals, and especially extreme self-protective reactions triggered by the sound of footsteps without visual source. Because this could constitute an involuntary confinement case, authorities immediately activated special witness victim protection protocols, implementing full isolation during the initial phase to ensure Evan's safety and preserve investigative integrity. The hospital moved him to a secure, sterile private room with restricted access. Only the medical team and 2 certified investigators, trained in post-captivity victim handling, were permitted entry, with media and all outsiders strictly prohibited. Evan's sudden reappearance after 5 years prompted the investigative team to urgently notify the FBI Seattle field office, as the matter now extended far beyond a standard missing person case. In the first hours, Evan remained unable to communicate. When physicians asked basic questions, he stared fixedly into a corner without blinking or turned his face away, showing the same avoidance response characteristic of someone subjected to coercive control. While receiving fluids through specialized tubing, he did not resist but trembled continuously. When someone entered the room too quickly, he immediately curled into a defensive posture as though anticipating attack. Investigators documented multiple conditioned reflexes in Evan's body: a stronger than normal startle at the sound of a metal door, instinctive face covering when room lights suddenly brightened, and immediate aversion when objects resembling cords or hooks came into view. These manifestations reinforced the hypothesis that he had lived for a very long time in an environment with tightly controlled light, nutrition, and space. After identity was confirmed via DNA testing, police established a preliminary assessment file focusing on four main axes: overall health status, indicators of long-term captivity, evidence of possible abuse, and the risk that an unidentified perpetrator remained at large. All initial data ruled out the possibility that Evan had survived independently in the wilderness for years, consistently pointing instead to a state of controlled isolation and complete separation from society. Therefore, before proceeding with any formal interviewing, authorities unanimously prioritized absolute physiological and psychological stabilization of the victim, instituting a 48-hour medical isolation period under strict security. The treatment room was equipped with one-way monitoring, the access corridor had permanent security detail, and information about Evan's return was tightly held to prevent any external interference, especially under the assumption that the perpetrator might still be free. The family was informed that Evan had survived, but direct contact was postponed until the medical team confirmed that a meeting would not cause severe psychological disruption for him. Evan's reemergence after 5 years not only closed a long-standing missing person file, but also shifted the matter into an entirely new phase, a complex criminal investigation centered on unlawful confinement, although at this moment, all questions about the perpetrator were temporarily set aside to make way for the most urgent priority: keeping Evan safe and stable enough for the truth to gradually come to light. In the first 48 hours of that medical quarantine period, the hospital deployed an interdisciplinary team consisting of a physical medicine and rehabilitation physician, a forensic pathologist, and a clinical nutrition specialist to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of Evan's body, with the goal of determining the extent of damage and the duration he may have spent under prolonged confinement conditions. The process began with creating a detailed map of old and new injuries across his entire body, and from the very initial examination, the doctors recorded numerous abnormal findings: arc-shaped scars and parallel grooves around the wrists and ankles, some faded over time, but still showing hardened fibrous tissue, indicating repeated friction from restraining devices over an extended period. Interspersed among them were more recent injuries, still pink and not yet fully healed, reflecting that the binding had not only occurred in the distant past, but had continued right up until the time Evan was discovered. X-ray images of the left shoulder and right elbow showed clear signs of axial bone displacement, evidence of fractures that had healed on their own without any medical intervention. The musculoskeletal team noted severe muscle atrophy in the thighs, calves, and upper arms, indicating prolonged lack of free movement. However, other muscle groups showed signs of caul-using, petechial bruising, and characteristic micro-tears in muscle fibers, typical of repetitive forced labor and cycles. This created an abnormal pattern: a person subjected to overall restricted movement, but forced to exert localized force, most likely in the directions of carrying, pulling, or lifting heavy objects within a confined space. When combined with the thick calluses on the palms, but not the type seen in rock climbers or free outdoor laborers, the doctors concluded these were clear signs of prolonged forced labor, in which Evan was not free to move about, but was compelled to perform repetitive actions within a very limited range. In parallel with the musculoskeletal structural assessment, the clinical nutrition team checked blood vitamin levels and found Evan's vitamin D concentration at a dangerously low level, reduced by more than 60% compared to adults living in low sunlight areas. This only occurs when the body has had almost no exposure to natural sunlight for many months or years. Endogenous melatonin levels were also severely disrupted, a common finding in individuals confined in environments lacking day-night cycles. Particularly, skin pigment analysis revealed a weakened epidermis, reduced elasticity, and a cold gray complexion, signs typically seen in people living in enclosed high-humidity, low-light spaces with no UV exposure for very long periods. The forensic team further discovered repeated microfractures on the sternum and ribs, in a pattern consistent with uneven pressure injuries. These were not signs of natural accidents, but are commonly found in victims who were restrained or fixed in the same position for extended periods. Additionally, Evan's fingernails exhibited multiple Bowes lines, horizontal grooves that appear when the body undergoes prolonged severe malnutrition or extreme physiological stress. The number of lines was sufficient to estimate that he had experienced at least 8 to 10 distinct periods of marked malnutrition within a few years. Hair analysis by the forensic team revealed abnormal isotopic fluctuations, indicating that Evan did not receive stable nutrition but went through intermittent starvation. Refeeding cycles, consistent with portion-controlled feeding under captivity. Notably, his hair was unusually long, but the ends were dry, brittle, and singed at the edges, signs of a damp, nutrient-poor environment, not an outdoor forest setting. This completely ruled out the possibility that Evan had been living as a homeless wanderer in the woods for several years before returning. In addition, the neuropsychology team observed conditioned fear-based reflexes. The sound of metal clanging caused Evan to flinch. Footsteps faster than normal speed made him raise his hands to protect his face. When a doctor quickly opened the room door, Evan's heart rate spiked suddenly. These are responses that only appear in individuals who have been monitored, disciplined, or threatened in a closed environment, with direct control exerted by a captor. After synthesizing all the data, the medical team concluded Evan's body bore clear signs of long-term captivity, exposure to extremely low-light conditions, deliberate restriction of movement, low-intensity but prolonged forced labor, repeated binding, multiple untreated injuries, and cyclical severe nutritional deprivation. No pattern in a natural environment, even prolonged survival in the wilderness, could produce such a collection of bodily evidence. These conclusions led the entire investigative team to unanimously determine that Evan had not been a lone survival case, but the victim of systematic prolonged confinement and coercion over multiple years. When the complete medical report was forwarded to the criminal investigation team, it was immediately entered into the case file as foundational evidence to guide the entire process of locating the place of confinement and identifying the perpetrator. From this point, the case officially shifted from a missing person survival scenario to a crime of prolonged kidnapping and forced confinement, paving the way for a series of deeper investigative steps to determine who had held Evan for the past 5 years, how, and for what purpose. When the psychology team began controlled memory recovery sessions, Evan could only provide fragmented, disjointed pieces, not forming a complete narrative, but the small recurring details were sufficient to sketch an outline of the environment where he had been held. The first thing Evan recalled was not an image but a smell, a sharp, thick, persistent machine oil odor that clung to the air, similar to the lubricant used for small mechanical equipment, such as generators, chainsaws, or compressors, not the smell of gasoline or outdoor diesel. He described how the smell penetrated his clothing, hair, and the crevices of his hands, and even when he tried to sleep, the oil vapor lingered in his throat like an uncomfortable film. The smell never completely disappeared, indicating the source was very close to where he was confined. Along with the oil smell, Evan repeatedly mentioned a steady rhythmic engine sound, not loud enough to vibrate the floor, but constant enough to form a low droning background that sometimes intensified at certain times of day. He said the engine noise wasn't from a car, but resembled a stationary machine with a consistent piston rhythm that didn't vary with movement, leading experts to suspect it could be a light-duty generator or a pump motor. Another memory fragment emerged when he described the sound of powerful, continuous water flow, not rain or a small stream. Evan insisted the sound was constant and strong, like water hitting rock or falling from a height. This suggested the confinement site was near a small waterfall or a fast-flowing section, most likely in one of the tributary areas of the Hoh River or Solduke, where the terrain changes abruptly with steep gradients, common features in those sub-branches. When asked about the space he was in, Evan repeatedly said he couldn't see the sky for most of the time. Light entered in only two forms: weak, brownish-yellow light, as if filtering through old wooden planks, or cold artificial light from a small, uneven bulb. This indicated a closed confinement space, most likely a small cabin made of aged, rotting wood or old floorboards, with tiny gaps insufficient to see the outside environment. Evan described a low ceiling where he sometimes had to stoop while moving, and the space was only wide enough for 2 steps laterally, implying an extremely limited cabin area. When he recalled touching the walls, he said they felt rough wood, some panels cold and damp, as if they had absorbed water for a long time, consistent with the wet environment typical of Pacific Northwest rainforests. He also remembered poor air circulation, with periods of no airflow, creating a slight oxygen deprivation feeling when the cabin was sealed for too long. A few times Evan recalled hearing a metal latch being opened before the cabin door cracked ajar. The door appeared wooden, but had an external lock cover. When questioned about the perpetrator or captor, Evan could only describe vague, inconsistent memory fragments, mainly because he never clearly saw the face. He said every time the door opened, the light behind the person was too bright, completely obscuring the face. Sometimes the person wore a hat, sometimes stood backlit. The clearest detail he remembered was heavy boots with thick soles, producing a regular clacking sound on the wooden floor. Additionally, the person always maintained distance, only pushing food or water into the cabin without fully entering. Evan described a deep voice, but only through a few short commands, not enough to identify regional accent. In some fragmented memories, Evan recalled his head being held or his eyes covered with thick cloth whenever he was moved out of the cabin. This explained why he had no visual memory of the path, surrounding area, or external features. Each time he was taken outside the cabin, the duration was very brief, and he was completely controlled, so what he remembered was only the feeling of damp earth underfoot and strong wind blowing from a single direction, possibly from the nearby fast-flowing water he had heard. Based on these memory fragments, the psychology experts concluded that Evan had been held in a fixed, small-scale structure, old wood construction, poor ventilation, with a nearby mechanical energy source located adjacent to an area with strong falling water sounds. The lack of memory of the captor's face was not simply due to trauma, but very likely because the captor deliberately obscured identification using light and distance. These details were quickly encoded and transferred into the criminal investigation file as key documentation for identifying the type of structure, equipment, and plausible environment matching Evan's description, laying the foundation for the next phase of locating the actual confinement site. After collecting all the fragmented memories Evan had about engine sounds, machine oil smell, and powerful water flow around the confinement site, the Joint Investigation Team, consisting of mechanical experts, USGS hydrologists, and environmental analysis technicians, began the cross-referencing process to narrow down the possible locations for a secret confinement cabin matching the victim's description. First, the mechanical team recorded Evan's description of the engine sound: low, steady drone, unchanging RPM regardless of movement, not overly loud, but present continuously like background noise for many hours each day. This ruled out car, truck, or conventional gasoline chainsaw engines, as those devices always show clear RPM variations. Instead, the sound better matched light-duty 1000-2000W generators, using specialized mixed fuel, which produce a stable low hum with characteristic vibration, common in catalogs of equipment used by residents in Washington's forested regions. When the experts expanded the analysis to the oil smell, Evan described thick, long-lasting, unlike diesel, they immediately narrowed it to a type called non-detergent small engine oil, used for older generators and sold only at a few small mechanic shops in the town of Forks. The list of stores selling this oil was short. Just 3 locations within a 30-mile radius of Olympic National Park, and only one reported regularly selling this oil to customers who live in the woods or work outside residential areas. The report from this store indicated that about 5 years earlier, a male customer regularly purchased a combination of non-detergent oil and replacement spark plugs, a pattern consistent with operating a small generator in damp forest conditions. From there, the investigation team temporarily listed generator models that produced sounds similar to Evan's description and found only 2 older models that used exactly that type of oil. Once the machine type was identified, an acoustic specialist reconstructed the expected sound spectrum for those 2 models and compared it with Evan's description of tone, rhythm, and amplitude variation. The results showed one of the 2 models had a variation pattern very close to Evan's description and noise levels appropriate for being heard inside a wooden cabin less than 5 meters away. In parallel with the mechanical analysis, the hydrology team cross-referenced the description of powerful water flow, steady, resonant, continuous, like water hitting rock, with seasonal flow maps of the Hoh River and Sol Duc tributaries. Based on USGS seasonal flow data, they determined that only certain stream segments or small waterfalls maintained stable sound year-round, strong enough to be audible inside a sealed cabin. These segments typically lie in the 400–900 feet elevation transition zone, where terrain drops abruptly and water flows over basalt layers. When this range was compared with descriptions of dim light filtering through rotting planks and a confined, poorly ventilated space, the team realized the cabin must be in a low-access area, without major trails, and importantly, close enough to a strong water source for the sound to permeate the interior evenly. After hydrological mapping eliminated more than 80% of unsuitable forest area, only points with consistently concentrated water energy remained. When merging data from engine acoustics, characteristic oil smell, and hydrological indicator, GIS specialists created layered maps based on 3 criteria: 1 areas capable of concealing an old wooden cabin undetected by ordinary hikers, 2 sufficiently close to a continuous strong water source, 3 within reasonable travel radius from clues obtained in years 3 and 4. The integration of these data layers produced a polygon containing only about 6 potential areas, each ranging from 0.3 to 0.7 square miles. All these areas were located in dense, thick forest, without permitted trails, and shared terrain features where a cabin could be built from old wood, placed on damp ground, and backed against a slope to reduce visibility from afar. Notably, 4 of the 6 potential areas were near the northern boundary of South Fork Hoh, precisely the region previously indicated by soil and pollen results from the raincoat, while the remaining 2 were near tributary connections between Sol Duc and the transitional forest zone. The fact that these 6 areas aligned with the controlled travel path inferred from year 3 wildlife camera photos led the investigation team to conclude that the confinement cabin very likely existed in one of these zones. All this data was entered into the case file under target area delimitation based on environmental traces, immediately providing a clear reference framework for the Special Task Force to conduct focused field surveys instead of the blind searches of previous years. After narrowing down to 6 potential areas based on sound, machine oil smell, and hydrological data, the investigation team moved to the phase of applying LiDAR and GIS to determine whether any concealed man-made structures existed under the thick forest canopy in those dense regions. LiDAR was selected for its ability to penetrate the dense canopy of the Olympic temperate rainforest, allowing detection of terrain anomalies invisible to the naked eye or commercial satellite imagery. The expert team retrieved 6 consecutive years of LiDAR data, including dry and wet season scans, then compared each layer for micro changes. The goal was to find portions of ground showing unnatural features, such as straight edges, right angles, or abnormally flat surfaces, elements impossible to form from tree roots or natural boulders. When the data layers were overlaid, 5 of the 6 potential areas showed only terrain distortions from fallen trees, minor landslides, or pooled floodwater, with no signs of man-made structures. But in the 6th area, located on the northeastern edge of the forest strip between South Fork Hoh and Sol Duke, the GIS team detected a rectangular anomaly approximately 11 x 15 feet in size, a dimension consistent with a small wooden cabin or temporary structure. What made this anomaly particularly noteworthy was its persistence across all 6 years of data, yet the LiDAR surface return showed slight changes of about 3–5% over time, suggesting gradual deterioration or rotting materials. Moreover, the anomaly did not appear in any official park infrastructure maps, nor did it belong to permitted lodging, storm shelters, ranger stations, or research cabins. This raised a high probability that it was an unauthorized structure, carefully concealed by thick old-growth canopy and over time nearly blended into the ground, detectable only by LiDAR. When the team cross-referenced the anomaly's location with the soil pollen data from the raincoat found in Sol Duke, they realized this position lay squarely in the intersection zone where the soil profile matched South Fork Hoh and the pollen corresponded to 500–700 feet elevation. Not only that, when the anomaly coordinates were plotted onto the acoustics and hydrology analysis maps, the location fell exactly within the range where the acoustic model predicted stable engine noise and strong water sounds from an eastern tributary stream could be heard. 3 data layers, soil, pollen, hydrology, and LiDAR, converged simultaneously at the same point, something that had never occurred in the entire prior investigation. The experts assessed that the likelihood this structure was related to Evan's confinement was extremely high, especially since the anomaly showed uniform right angles but with the roof completely obscured by canopy, reflecting insufficient light signals to be detected by commercial satellite imagery. When comparing year-by-year LiDAR terrain features, they further noted that the structure neither moved nor disappeared, meaning it was a fixed construction, consistent with Evan's description of an unchanging confinement space throughout his captivity. From this point, the investigation team immediately recommended forming a specialized deep-field verification team, consisting of park personnel, criminal investigators, deep forest survival experts, and 2 LiDAR technicians to guide with precise positioning equipment. The anomaly area was too densely wooded, with no natural access paths, so the survey team had to prepare an approach plan, combining overland travel, temporary trail cutting, and waypoint data to minimize the risk of getting lost in complex terrain. An urgent plan was drawn up. A helicopter crew would deploy the inspection team approximately 400–500 meters from the anomaly site to avoid drawing attention if the cabin was still in use, while ensuring no canopy damage that could destroy evidence needed for investigation. All operations were required to maintain relative silence, avoiding large engine noise, because if the cabin remained active, any unusual sound could prompt the perpetrator to flee or destroy evidence. When the field inspection team received the deployment order, it was the first time in 5 years they had a specific coordinate to target, a point deep in an unsurveyed forest region, aligning with every environmental detail Evan had described in his fragmented memories. The clear appearance of the anomaly on LiDAR represented the biggest breakthrough, moving the investigation into the phase of actual on-site approach for the first time since the day Evan went missing. When the special tactics team was dropped at the approach point approximately 450 meters from the anomaly, they split into 3 groups to advance using a pincer tactic, ensuring no remaining subject inside the cabin would have any chance to escape. The dense forest conditions made movement extremely difficult. Long trailing vines, layers of fallen tree trunks, and wet moss making the ground slippery, forced them to cut their way forward meter by meter with machetes, while maintaining absolute silence to avoid generating any significant sound signatures. GPS navigation followed LiDAR-derived waypoint data, and after nearly 40 minutes of slow approach, the lead group caught their first sight of the cabin structure, a low wooden block almost completely blending into the surrounding landscape. The cabin's surface was covered in such thick moss that from a distance it resembled a natural earth mound. Old nylon netting stretched over the roof and covered with dead branches made it nearly impossible for overhead cameras to distinguish the structure from the forest canopy. The cabin walls were built from uneven horizontal planks, some rotten, warped, and showing long-term water seepage. Gaps between the boards were sealed with a mixture of mud and moss fibers to reduce light leakage. The only door was on the north side, with wooden hinges but a simple metal lock, reinforced externally by an additional steel wire bar, all indicating the cabin had been hand-built without meeting any legal construction standards. Before entry, the forensic team established a 20-meter safe perimeter around the cabin, took 360-degree photographs, fully documented positions, structure, anomalous objects, footprints, and marked 3 potential approach points likely to retain subject trace evidence. When the team opened the door, light revealed the interior space exactly as Evan had described, a narrow confinement pen with a low ceiling, rotting wooden walls, and a space so cramped it could only accommodate a single thin, dilapidated mattress. Inside the cabin, the thick smell of engine oil, the same type Evan had described, mixed with the musty odor of aged wood and the sharp tang of rusting metal. Near the left corner of the cabin, they discovered a coil of dark brown paracord, its inner core discolored from prolonged sweat contact. Under flashlight illumination, moss fibers were visibly adhered to the surface, and the forensic team immediately tested it with swabs, recovering microscopic human skin traces. Next to the cord was a length of synthetic binding material with cracking cut horizontally, its edges showing signs of repeated tight constriction. On the cabin floor, they observed circular wear marks consistent with a subject being restrained in a single fixed position for an extended period. In the opposite corner, investigators located 2 small metal fuel cans, labels faded but matching the exact type used for small generators, consistent with the engine type previously identified by the mechanical team from Evan's description. One can still contained residual oil. Samples were collected immediately and later confirmed as non-detergent small engine oil, the type sold only in limited quantities at certain stores in Forks. Near the back wall, they found a small toolbox containing spark plugs, worn blades, screws, bolts, and galvanized wire, indicating on-site generator maintenance. This perfectly matched memories of continuous engine noise in the confinement environment. Continuing the examination, the team discovered numerous vertical scratches on a low crossbeam, some long streaks corresponding to the reach height of a stooped person. Later analysis confirmed epithelial cells matching Evan's DNA. This was the first time investigators obtained direct biological evidence linking the victim to a specific location. Beneath the cabin floor, when forensics pried up a rotten board, they found an unusually compacted patch of earth showing signs that the captor had dug a small cache for storage. Inside the cache was an old wooden box wrapped in moisture-proof plastic. Contained within was a soft-cover notebook, yellowed but still legible. The notebook was written in neat, organized handwriting, divided by date but without an author's name. Entries tracked Evan's status month by month: eating, sleeping, activity, quiet, resistance, taken outside, restrained, locked back. Some pages coldly described Evan's emotions as observations: silent today, strong reflexes today, reduced rations, no outside time. It also recorded generator maintenance days, fuel purchase amounts, spark plug replacement times, and notes on engine sound as stable or off rhythm. Later pages described Evan's coughing fits, suggesting the captor monitored the victim's health solely to maintain control rather than provide care. The notebook was considered critical evidence. It proved the cabin was not a temporary site, but a systematic long-term holding facility spanning years. In addition to the notebook, forensics recovered old blood traces on a board near the door, minute hairs stuck to the wall edge, and epithelial cells on the binding cord, all later confirmed to match Evan's DNA, 100%. This completely eliminated any doubt about whether the cabin was the place of confinement. During the exterior examination, investigators also found nearby ground with deep, heavy old boot prints, consistent with Evan's description of thick-soled boots thudding on wooden flooring. The footprints indicated at least one adult regularly visited the cabin, traveling along the only open path cutting through the forest toward the slope area. Another key point: the cabin showed no signs of use in the weeks leading up to the examination, evidenced by undisturbed layers of decaying leaves and the thinned oil smell. This reinforced the hypothesis that the captor had abandoned the cabin shortly after Evan escaped, or was forced to leave the location. With all collected evidence, investigators conclusively determined that the cabin was the place where Evan had been held captive for the majority of his 5-year disappearance. The site contained every environmental feature Evan described: enclosed space, low ceiling, limited light, engine oil smell, steady engine noise, and the loud sound of rushing water from a nearby stream. At the conclusion of the examination, the cabin was sealed, all evidence transported to the lab, and the report recorded the site as a long-existing crime scene, systematically constructed and operated by at least one individual with wilderness survival skills, capable of concealing the structure and maintaining a confinement facility deep in the forest without detection. Immediately after the cabin was confirmed as the holding site, the investigation shifted to tracing the origin of the items to narrow down potential purchasers or users in the area. The first key evidence was the dark brown synthetic binding cord found in the cabin. Fiber structure analysis identified it as industrial-grade Type R reinforced paracord, a rare product not sold in bulk, supplied to only 3 specialty stores across Washington state, with only one store in Forks retaining retail purchase records from the past 8 years. Cross-referencing old receipts, the store confirmed that between 2016 and 2019, only one customer regularly purchased Type R cord in small spools, in quantities matching the cut lengths found in the cabin. Purchases were made in cash, but the buyer had signed S. Brandt, matching the distinctive letter forms appearing on 2 pages of the notebook recovered from the cabin. Next, the mechanical team traced the fuel cans and generator parts recovered at the scene. Based on the worn blade structure and faint markings on the spark plugs, specialists identified the generator as an older Harrison Compact 1200 model, sold only from 2003 to 2010 in Jefferson and Clallam counties. When checking surviving warranty customer lists in Jefferson, they found only 7 people had purchased this model, but only 2 had also bought the exact spare spark plug set found in the cabin. One of those 2 was a man named Silas Brandt, residing on the southern outskirts of Forks. The other had died 4 years earlier from illness. Noting purchase dates, they discovered Brandt had also bought additional parts in 2018, very close to the period when the cabin was most likely actively used to hold Evan. Combining the generator records, investigators narrowed down individuals capable of long-term wilderness survival, an essential requirement for maintaining a secret cabin undetected for over 5 years. Olympic National Park records listed approximately 28 known backwoods long-term dwellers, including hunters, hermits, illegal loggers, or individuals previously cited for temporary structures in the forest. Filtering for those living long-term near South Fork Hoh, who had purchased or used small mechanical tools, and with a history of movement along rarely used forest branches, the list shrank to 5 names. Among these 5, only one had a prior record involving minor violent behavior and resided within 20 miles of both the Type R cord and spark plug store. That was Silas Brandt. The name continued to stand out when the team matched the cabin footprints against the shoe database. The near-complete imprint found in the soil in front of the cabin showed a distinctive tread pattern from 1989 Red Wing boots, a classic model known for its thick, heavy rubber sole that leaves deep prints. This line had long been discontinued, but in the Forks area only 4 people were known to still own and use such a pair. 3 cooperated and provided their boots for direct comparison, all mismatched. The remaining individual, the only one who refused cooperation when contacted by phone, was Silas Brandt. Background investigation revealed Brandt was a man of about 55 years old, living alone, Formerly employed in logging, skilled with mechanical tools, familiar with Olympic forest terrain, and known to have built temporary structures for overnight stays in the woods multiple times over the previous 2 decades. Neighbors described him as unfriendly, secretive, frequently disappearing for weeks without anyone knowing where he went. The only available traffic camera footage ever captured Brandt's vehicle entering the southern part of Olympic National Forest 3 years earlier, coinciding with a period of intensified holding activity recorded in the cabin notebook. Another detail making Brandt prominent was that the S. Brandt signature on the Type R cord receipt matched the right-leaning slant and distinctive cross strokes appearing in the cabin notebook, leading investigators to conclude the notebook writer was likely the same person who purchased the cord. Tracing the engine oil source also revealed a single store in Forks that sold non-detergent small engine oil in small batches to forest workers over many years, and store employees positively identified Brandt as a regular buyer, even recalling him asking about spark plugs suitable for an old generator model, exactly the type found. When combining all data sources, Type R cord, fuel cans, spark plugs, 1989 Red Wing boots, wilderness survival records, and initial non-cooperation with police, the entire investigation team unanimously concluded that only one suspect fit every criterion: Silas Brandt. Brandt's file was upgraded to primary suspect status, and surveillance was requested to monitor his movements and determine any direct connection to the holding cabin. After Silas Brandt was identified as the primary suspect, the investigation launched a 2-week surveillance operation to gather behavioral patterns and assess the level of threat before proceeding with arrest. A fixed observation team was positioned in the southern forest area of Forks, where Brandt resided, while a mobile covert team tailed his old pickup truck on routes leading into Olympic National Forest. Surveillance results showed Brandt had a habit of leaving home at irregular times, mostly at night or near dawn, usually traveling along old logging roads, routes closed for years, but still passable for large tired vehicles. His forest trips were not recreational. He carried small fuel cans, tool bags, and sometimes paracord coils matching the type found in the cabin. Scouts recorded twice that he stopped in an area about 3 miles from the cabin anomaly, then turned off his headlights and walked into the forest in darkness, staying over an hour before returning. This raised the risk that Silas knew the cabin had been discovered or suspected it was no longer safe. If he returned to destroy evidence, the entire scene could be erased, severely complicating legal proceedings. Due to this risk, command assessed that intervention was necessary before Brandt had another opportunity to reach the cabin. An arrest plan was developed around Logging Road 219, a narrow dirt route connecting Forks to a western branch of South Fork Hoh, the road Brandt used most frequently. This logging road featured 3 natural choke points, allowing the Special Tactics team to easily set up roadblocks at both ends and tighten the net once Brandt entered the designated position. On day 13 of the operation, at approximately 4:12 a.m., Brandt left home carrying 2 small fuel cans, a tool bag, and his old 1989 Red Wing boots. The surveillance team followed at a safe distance, reporting he was heading directly toward Logging Road 219. When Brandt's old pickup entered the first choke point, the front blocking team used an unmarked vehicle to close the road ahead, while the rear team closed in from behind, forcing him to stop in a confined space with no escape route. When the Special Tactics team's headlights illuminated the scene, Brandt reacted instantly. He ducked toward the passenger seat, as if hiding or reaching for something, prompting the team leader to order an immediate approach. Armed officers advanced on both sides of the vehicle, ordering him to exit. Brandt hesitated for a few seconds before raising his hands to be cuffed. During cuffing, the team noted on the back seat 2 coils of Type R paracord, matching the cabin find, a fresh can of non-detergent small engine oil, and a nylon bag containing Harrison 1200 spark plugs, the only model compatible with the cabin generator. The near-perfect match of items virtually eliminated any element of coincidence. After being read his Miranda rights, Brandt was transported to the Clallam County Holding Facility, while investigators requested an emergency search warrant for his residence based on the on-scene evidence and the strong link to the cabin. The warrant was approved in under 2 hours. During the search of Brandt's home, a small isolated wooden house on the edge of Forks, they found in the rear storage room a metal container holding numerous old memory cards, notebooks, and topographic maps. Most prominent was a set of USGS maps, heavily marked in red ink, highlighting hidden routes, shortcuts, and no human traffic zones, with the cabin anomaly location circled multiple times. One map even noted dates spanning 6 years, showing Brandt tracked forest patrol and hiker movements on main trails to avoid detection. In a nearby wooden drawer, investigators found another notebook. Unlike the one found in the cabin, this appeared to be a preparatory log, listing planned cabin maintenance days, expected resupply dates, and times the person inside was taken outside. Many entries directly matched those in the cabin notebook, proving both were written by the same person. Even the right-leaning S, the cross-stroke on T, and the overall writing continuity perfectly matched the S. Brandt signature on the Type R cord receipt. In the corner of the storage room, investigators discovered the 1989 Red Wing boots, soles caked with dried mud. Quick examination showed the tread pattern matched the footprints recovered in front of the cabin. The soles also bore mineral traces consistent with the unique soil profile of the South Fork Hoh area, previously described by the lab. Continuing the search, beneath the bedroom floorboards, investigators found a long metal box containing crude tools, wire cutters, a dagger, an old flashlight, copper wire, and a rubber mallet. These tools were all capable of being used to build, repair, and operate the holding cabin. Several showed wear and oil residue, matching the cabin oil samples, later confirmed by the lab as the same source. Most significantly, in an old file box, investigators discovered photographs of Evan from his time as a tour guide, images cut out from a missing persons bulletin. This proved Brandt had been monitoring the victim and knew exactly who he was holding. All evidence recovered from Brandt's home formed an overwhelming chain connecting him to the cabin. Matching binding cord, matching oil, matching spark plugs, maps marking the cabin, corresponding notebook, boots matching footprints, and evidence of prior surveillance of Evan. After completing the search, investigators reported that the degree of evidence match far exceeded the threshold required for formal charges. By the end of the day, Silas Brandt was placed in criminal custody, pending a series of charges related to unlawful imprisonment, prolonged captivity, assault, and serious bodily injury against Evan Kincaid. The trial of Silas Brandt began nearly a year after his arrest, with an indictment consisting of a series of charges related to unlawful imprisonment, prolonged confinement, assault, causing serious bodily injury, and intentional infliction of physical debilitation against Evan Kincaid. On the first day, the prosecution presented all evidence recovered from the cabin, a chain of forensic evidence considered the strongest foundation in the case file. First was the DNA. Samples collected from the restraint ropes, the ceiling beam, the cabin floor, and the soil pit all matched Evan's DNA, 100%, proving that the victim had been confined and in prolonged contact with items inside the cabin. Foreign DNA found on several generator repair tools matched Brandt's DNA profile, obtained after his arrest. Brandt's fingerprints also appeared on the fuel can, spark plugs, and toolbox, all consistent with the evidence recovered from the cabin. Tool marks on the cabin wood and restraint ropes were analyzed by experts and concluded to match the tool set seized from Brandt's residence. Knife edge patterns, plier teeth marks, and wire twist impressions all fell within the range that could have been produced by tools owned by Brandt. Specific items, such as the Type R rope spool, non-detergent oil drum, and Harrison 1200 spark plugs, were confirmed as rare types, exactly matching those found in the cabin and corresponding to Brandt's purchase records at local stores, further strengthening the direct link between him and the crime scene. After the cabin evidence was presented, the prosecution moved to the medical records, a central element in establishing the prolonged and systematic nature of the confinement. Forensic physicians successively testified that Evan's body showed signs of years of restricted movement, cyclic malnutrition, lack of sunlight, and numerous old untreated injuries. His vitamin D levels were dangerously low, and the focused muscle atrophy in specific muscle groups indicated he could not have been living freely in the wilderness, but was the victim of a confined environment. Rope scars running along his wrists and ankles, along with misaligned healed bone fractures, were considered high-value legal evidence, as they not only reflected injury, but directly matched the physical evidence found at the cabin. When presenting the soil and pollen analysis, the environmental expert explained how soil from South Fork Hoh adhered to the rain jacket found at Sol Duc, and how pollen from vegetation at 500–700 feet elevation ruled out the possibility of the jacket having fallen elsewhere. These data, combined with map overlays, helped the jury understand that the cabin was located precisely within the intersection zone indicated by the soil and pollen. Next, GIS and LiDAR experts described comparing 6 consecutive years of data to detect a rectangular anomaly hidden beneath the forest canopy, explaining that such a structure could not have appeared naturally, was not on park maps, and had characteristics matching the actual cabin. LiDAR was projected in court as a 3D simulation, comparing natural terrain contours with the cabin anomaly, clearly showing the cabin's stable existence over many years, consistent with the period of Evan's disappearance. Footprint data was evaluated by a footwear analysis expert. The footprint pattern at the cabin perfectly matched the sole pattern of the Red Wing 1989 boots seized from Brandt's residence, including characteristic wear patterns, stride spacing, and impression depth. The prosecution emphasized that in the Forks area, only one person still owned and wore a pair of 1989 model boots with that exact wear pattern, Brandt himself. The rope tracking, tracing the source of the Type R restraint rope, was presented as a critical link. The only sales receipt for such rope in 3 years bore the buyer name as Brandt, and the signature fragment in the cabin logbook matched this handwriting style. Each small piece of evidence combined to form a unified, nearly irrefutable chain. When it came time for Evan's testimony, the court applied special protective measures. Evan could only answer questions within the limits of his fragmented memory, but what he did recall, the smell of machine oil, the constant sound of the running engine, the roar of strong water, the cramped cabin space, yellow light filtering through wooden planks, the heavy footsteps of the captor, all matched the actual cabin and the recovered evidence. He could not identify the captor's face, but his descriptions of the captor's behavior, passing food through a small slot, never entering the cabin, keeping light behind to obscure the face, using a low and curt voice, aligned with the control pattern. The prosecution argued Brandt had maintained. The defense attempted to counter that the cabin was merely an abandoned structure and could not prove Brandt had held Evan there. They argued that footprints could be mistaken, and items such as rope or oil drums could have been used by many people. However, the prosecution dismantled each argument. The cabin could not be abandoned because of continuous generator maintenance signs, daily log entries, items consistent with the time frame of Evan's disappearance, and Brandt's DNA on the cabin's operating tools. Soil and pollen ruled out the cabin being elsewhere. LiDAR ruled out natural formation. The cabin logbook's density of information, matching time and events, ruled out the possibility it was unused during Evan's disappearance. When the defense suggested Evan might have gone to the cabin to take shelter on his own and later misremembered due to psychological illness, the prosecution used medical records to refute this, pointing out that Evan's physical injuries could not have been self-inflicted. The years-long low vitamin D levels were incompatible with light entering the cabin, and the injury pattern matched long-term restraint rather than temporary shelter. In particular, when the jury was shown the side-by-side comparison of the cabin logbook and Brandt's home logbook, the near-perfect match in dates and activities destroyed every remaining defense strategy. After 7 days of trial, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a unanimous verdict. Silas Brandt was guilty on all counts, and the cabin where Evan was held was a purposefully operated crime scene for many years. This verdict put an end to all defense arguments and confirmed that the forensic evidence chain had created a near-airtight case file in Clallam County investigation history. Following the jury's unanimous verdict in the trial phase, the Clallam County Superior Court proceeded to the sentencing phase for Silas Brandt. Based on the severity of the prolonged confinement, the systematic nature of the crime, the physical and psychological consequences Evan endured for 5 years, and the large volume of forensic evidence proving intentional conduct, the judge sentenced Silas Brandt to life imprisonment without parole, stating that this was the only punishment appropriate for a criminal who had deliberately isolated, controlled, and debilitated another human being for an extended period with no sign of remorse. After the trial, Evan was returned to the Psychological Rehabilitation Unit, where a team of trauma specialists, psychiatrists, and behavioral therapists worked with him on a multi-year treatment plan. Evan had to gradually readjust to natural light after years in darkness, overcome the reflex to flinch at the sound of heavy boots, and relearn spatial orientation in open environments, abilities his nervous system had severely degraded after prolonged confinement. The initial therapy sessions progressed very slowly. Many times Evan could not answer questions or had to leave midway when triggered by cabin-related stimuli. Over time, however, he gradually rebuilt control over his fear responses, though doctors determined he would require lifelong psychological treatment to maintain stability. In terms of life reorientation, Evan decided to abandon his career as a forest guide. He could no longer return to the woods or work in environments with engine noise, strong water sounds, or confined spaces, all major trauma triggers. His family brought him to Spokane, where he could live in an open urban environment with less forest noise and nearby medical support. There, he joined programs for survivors of long-term captivity and slowly built a new life, staying away from everything once connected to his former work. The Silas Brandt case, and the fact that Evan was found alive after 5 years, had a profound impact on Olympic National Park and the entire search and rescue system of Washington state. The National Park Service conducted a comprehensive review of procedures for long-term missing persons cases, especially those with unusual elements from the start. A series of new regulations were issued. All missing person cases showing signs of trail deviation must be elevated in priority. SARE teams must prioritize early soil and pollen collection to prevent loss of environmental data. LiDAR integration was moved into the initial assessment phase rather than reserved for expanded investigation. Additionally, the park established coordination mechanisms with USGS and FBI for long-term missing cases to quickly identify terrain anomalies potentially related to unauthorized man-made structures. These reforms were seen as a major step forward to prevent a confinement cabin from existing undetected for years, as had happened in Evan's case. Concurrently, Evan's family established a support fund called the Kincaid Long-Term Missing Initiative, focused on helping relatives of long-term missing persons access search resources, environmental forensic evaluation, and emotional support. The fund provides grants for thermal drones, affordable LiDAR analysis services, and legal advisors for families lacking the means to pursue long-term searches. In its first 2 years, the fund assisted more than 15 cases, improving local communities' ability to intervene early before cases went cold. The broader social impact of the case was also significant. National media coverage highlighted gaps in handling deep wilderness missing persons cases, creating pressure that led federal agencies to re-examine natural disaster accident criteria in cases with anomalous elements. Many ISR experts assessed that the biggest lesson from the Evan Kincaid case is never to assume wilderness disappearances always stem from accidents. Sometimes a small trail deviation or a single piece of evidence can be the first sign of criminal activity. The case also promoted stronger connections between environmental forensics and ISR operations, demonstrating that soil, pollen, footprint, sound, and LiDAR can all be critical clues even without traditional evidence. In summary, the Silas Brandt case changed how communities approach long-term missing persons cases, reformed search mechanisms, and sent a powerful message that acts of confinement hidden in the deep forest darkness cannot remain concealed forever. in the face of advancing forensics and the persistent efforts of victims' families. For Evan, the recovery journey will be long, but the perpetrator's sentence of life without parole gives him and his family a clear, though painful and necessary, ending, allowing them to begin a new life after years of freedom stolen in the silence of Olympics forests. The story of Evan Kincaid in the Olympic National Park disappearance case is not only a complex criminal file, but also reflects very real issues in contemporary American life, from personal safety and the response capacity of rescue systems, to mental health and resilience after trauma. Evan's vanishing after a final radio signal and the initial SR team's assumption of an accident show that Americans often underestimate risks when venturing into nature, especially in vast wilderness areas of Washington, Colorado, or Alaska. The lesson is clear. Even if you are a seasoned guide like Evan, clear communication plans, independent positioning devices, and emergency signaling systems remain life or death essentials. Additionally, the initial search team's years-long oversight of the confinement cabin highlights that communities around forest areas need greater vigilance toward unusual residency behaviors, such as unregistered off-grid dwellings, or individuals entering and exiting the forest on inconsistent schedules, factors that appeared in Silas Brandt's case. From a human perspective, Evan's refusal to return to the woods, his need for long-term PTSD treatment, and his complete life change demonstrate that surviving victims require systematic psychological support, not just short-term medical care. This is a lesson for modern American society, where post-trauma mental recovery remains an increasingly pressing need. Finally, the persistence of Evan's family, organizing their own searches, pressuring for the case to be reopened, and establishing a support fund, underscores the essential role of community in supplementing official systems. In a vast country like the United States, where SAR resources are not always sufficient, the tenacity of families and communities can make the difference between a cold case and finding a living victim. Thank you for joining me on this haunting yet inspiring story of Evan. If you found it valuable, don't forget to subscribe to continue following complex survival cases and investigations like this one. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring unsolved mysteries in American life.